What's going on, everyone? This is Matt again, and I'm here to finally bring you my Webpack video series on CSS. So I know it's something a lot of people have been asking about, and I've been planning on doing all along, so finally glad to be getting this out there. I do want to say quick thanks to everyone who's been so supportive of my videos so far, and I'm hoping to start bringing more videos more frequently. Let's get into it. I do just want to say real quick that since the last video series I've done, Webpack 2 is finally out of beta. So just be aware that right now for these videos, I will be using Webpack 2. There are some key differences and breaking changes between Webpack 1 and 2 that I will point out along the way. But I do suggest everyone upgrade to Webpack 2 if you're starting from fresh. If you're not and you're working with an existing app, most of these things I'm showing you, you could do in Webpack 1, right? There are some syntax differences. I will point them out along the way. And then just one other thing to be aware of, since Webpack 2 is officially supported now, if you npm install Webpack, you will get version 2. It's not under like a different name called like Webpack 2 or something like that. It's just the major version release. Okay, so just be aware of that. All right, so without further ado, this is going to be Webpack and CSS. So let's just go over the setup here first. So this Webpack config I have going on is pretty simple and close to what I had in my other series. Which, by the way, if you're brand new to Webpack, I suggest you watch that or some other videos on Webpack first, because I won't be talking about basic Webpack functionality. I'm just going to be talking about new points that relate to CSS. So I've got entry here. I got two pages, a home and an about page, right? Very simple. Outputting, these are, by the way, coming from a source directory in the root of my project. I'm outputting to a dist folder, and right now I'm just using Babel to compile JavaScript, which I'll show you those files in a second. I'm running the dev server here, content base of the dist folder, inline true, and we'll talk about hot reloading mode a little bit later. And as you can see, I'm using two HTML Webpack plugins to build two HTML files for me. One is the home page, one is the about page. Right, nothing too crazy there, and I'm assigning the two separate bundles to those two separate HTML files. Right, so let's look at the files here. I've got a source folder, which has an app folder, which is basically where I'm putting my JavaScript, and I've got two entry points, a home and an about, and basically all they do is return a string. Okay, so you can see this kind of like React looking syntax here, but basically I'm just using ES6 template strings to render out just some string HTML. Same thing here with home. And then I have this like footer component, which you can see I'm using inside both home and about here. And they're basically just, I'm using jQuery here just to render to the page here. So I end up with this. So I have my home page here. So you get the title. This is the footer down here, these two links, and they link to the HTML pages. So you see when I go to about, it goes to about.html. If I'm at home, Webpack knows to serve up the index.html from the base URL. All right. So I think that's pretty much it. Let me just show you the dependencies, nothing crazy. So obviously we're going to be working with Webpack and Webpack Dev-Server. I have jQuery in here just so I can render that HTML easily. And then again, right now I'm just using Babel for the JavaScript. These are just presets for it in the loader. And the HTML Webpack plugin to generate the HTML files. Okay. So you might be comfortable working with JavaScript by now with Webpack. Certainly if you've done any React development, you're probably using Webpack at this point in time. But there's a big question here about CSS, right? And what's been going on is that as we develop more component-based design and code bases, right, there's starts to become more of this blaring gap between our JavaScript and our styles. really we've kind of eliminated HTML almost altogether because HTML has been bundled in with our components now, especially with libraries like React, Vue, Angular, right? So we don't really write HTML anymore, so that's kind of good. But styles is another thing entirely because remember CSS is kind of its own separate beast, right? So when we develop these components, most of the time we're not just thinking of logic and markup, which is basically what React components, other components come down to. We're thinking of how they look as well. So you can imagine that our CSS is it ideally should be very coupled, right, with the things that we're creating here. So if I look at this CSS file I just have one CSS file for all of my pages right now. So I've got a global section here, which is just body and H1s, right? I've got page specifics. So the H1 on the about page should be green. So if I go to about, you'll see I've got this green border here. On the home page, it's white. And then on the footer, I've got some styles as well. So this is like a specific component styles, right? So this approach is okay, but it's definitely not scalable. Obviously, we'd want to maybe use something like Sass so we can break up into smaller files and things like that. So that's a little bit better. But really what the problem that Webpack tries to solve is it allows you to manage CSS dependencies based on your JavaScript. So what exactly do I mean by that? So this CSS here is only required on the about page, right? This CSS is only required on my home page. This is only required on any page that the footer is used, right? But by putting it all into one file, right? And even again, you have to remember that unless you have a complicated CSS build process, right? Even when we're using Sass, most of the time we're just compiling a bunch of smaller files into one big file, right? So we're unnecessarily loading CSS depending on the content of the page. So to combat that, what we can do is we can leverage the power of Webpack to basically require in certain CSS only depending on what it's coupled to. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to make it so that the about CSS only gets loaded when the about page is loaded, right? So right now, not a whole lot going on. And you'll notice another annoying thing too is because I'm using Webpack HTML plugin, right? I have all my JavaScript and even my HTML in this source folder, right? But you have to remember that the HTML is being served from our dist folder, from our output folder. Even when using dev-server, right? We're serving from memory. Dev-server is creating this dist folder for us. And I want to reference my styles from my index, but I can't put them in here because everything's being served from dist. So in order to reference it, I actually have to create this dist folder and put my styles in here, right? So this is kind of annoying. So this is another reason why we'd want to work with Webpack to use CSS as well, just because we'll take advantage of hot reloading. We can get rid of this dist folder, and all we have to really commit is our source code. And then when we're pushing to production, we can run a whole build step, compile all of our CS and stuff. So I hope that was good, informative for the setup. In the next video, we're going to actually get started with the CSS loader and stuff. See you then.